Real people, real radio. Wherever you are, make it TFR. The Truth Frequency Radio.
All righty, well, welcome. This is Anthony Patch, and this is the Anthony Patch Show. Thank you for listening today. I appreciate everybody who is joining us in the chat room today. I'd acknowledge you, but I can't see my chat room. About 15 minutes ago, my backup, or I should say my primary, my old laptop, was remotely hacked and taken down. They shut my power down, and I am on my newer laptop as we speak. Hopefully that'll hold together, but I do not have Skype, so I'm on the phone today. Thanks to Kev Baker, who's here with us today, as always, covering my back, working out all the bugs so that I can share with you today. So welcome, and hopefully things will hold together and they won't cut me off. I'm running solo today, with the exception, of course, of having Kev here with me to jump in and help out. We would like to take some questions later on in the show from the chat room, and perhaps if we can work it out, I'll let Kev, wave his magic wand, so to speak, and see if we can take some calls as well. But we'll do the first segment just kind of covering some of the highlights, and then we'll see how the chat room fills with questions and go from there. A lot's been going on. We had the Super Bowl, of course, with Lady Gaga, and lots of YouTube videos going through and interpreting all of the satanic elements of her ritual. I'm not going to cover those today. Lots of that has been done by people like my good friend Gon Shimura from Face Like the Sun, and some very good analysis out there. I think people are really understanding the language and the symbols of the rituals very accurately now, and it's really amazing how many people on YouTube, and a lot of people want to put YouTube down and put down people and their channels and whatnot, and yeah, there's a lot of nonsense out there, but I really have to commend the people that have, in the last couple of years, learned the language from the spiritual, from the occulted side of things, and have been able to interpret accurately what's going on in our environment, in our world, and how we're being affected by the spiritual world. And you've heard me in the last couple of shows talk about psychological operations and psyops in general. And I'll touch on that a little bit. I'll review a little bit of that with 5G and the 2048 model number from D-Wave Corporation, which was just released late last month, the 2000 Q, and that is actually a 2048 chip. But we'll get into that later. So here are the topics we're going to go through today. We're going to talk about the Super Bowl in terms of Super Bowl 51 in Roman numerals. That is LI. That is also the element name for lithium. So we're going to talk a little bit about lithium and chemtrails. We're going to go back to my stomping grounds, so to speak, of Saturn, and talk about the Cassini orbital satellite and what the latest news on that is and what's coming up in September with Cassini. Had a great question from a audience member, Laura. Sends me a lot of videos. She's a researcher in her own way, in her own right, and sends me some great information. But she had a question about Saturn and Cassini, and so we'll get to that. The other point is, pardon me, hopefully my voice isn't getting hacked here. The other thing we'll try to get through today is I have an announcement regarding a DVD that was produced by myself and Douglas Woodward, one of my other co-authors in Revising Reality, my nonfiction book that's been out for, about 3 months now, and is still available on my website. What we did was we joined with Lynn Oz from her great channel on YouTube, and she was our host for a conversation that ran about 2 hours. And what we did was we took slides from a PowerPoint presentation that Douglas put together that has the key points from our book. And the reason that I even bring the book up is that it's a great foundational tool to a lot of the things that people are talking about in the truth community that have to do with how our reality is being shaped and how it's being changed, whether chemically through lithium, chemtrails, through 5G, Wi-Fi technology from the D-Wave Corporation, which is associated with CERN, of course, to Fukushima and reactor number 2, which just in about the last 10 days, the news has been, pardon the purposeful pun, but the news has been leaking out of Fukushima that reactor 2, the core, is doing the good old China syndrome. They cannot locate the core. It's melted down through the floor of the reactor vessel. Therefore, we have another more massive, this time, plume of radiation that is emanating from Japan and spreading towards the continental United States. Many of you as listeners to the show already know this information. But I bring it up just because it is part of that entire manipulation of our environment, the terraforming of the planet, as you've heard me cite before. But really, it's the conjunction of all these things that are coming together that are reshaping our reality. So Douglas and I will be discussing Revising Reality, the DVD, and the contents of it over the course of about 2 hours next week. Next week's show, next Friday, Douglas will be my special guest. And in essence, we'll recreate much of the conversation that we recorded for this DVD. So that's sort of my gift to you as listeners, as participants here on this show, that you get a chance for free to hear more in-depth discussion about this. Now, we'll try to put up the PowerPoint if I can get Skype working again. You know, it's so dodgy to get Skype happening here at my end, and it has nothing to do with my Wi-Fi signal. The timing is always right before I come on the show or right when I'm about to go on the air that Skype gets cut, and that's why I'm on my cell phone again today. The rest of the week it runs fine. And when I'm on other shows like Tradcat Night, I was on just recently with Eric, I generally don't get interfered with too much, but they sure target me when I'm here on TFR. And I think that's because TFR is high on their radar with all of the other great shows that we have on this network that really bring the cutting-edge research to you. And I want to thank you for the opportunity just to talk to you, just to have the ability to talk to a friendly audience. So I'm going to get a little personal with you. I know it's trite to say that you're my family, but think of it in this context. In your daily walk of life with your family, with your coworkers, with your neighbors, and just people in general that you run into, how often do you get an opportunity to touch on the topics that we talk about on Truth Frequency? How often do you get an opportunity to talk about or even listen and learn perhaps some new information from someone like myself and the specific topics that I get into? This is really a rare opportunity, and I say that it's also rare in the sense that it's an endangered species. Our ability to have this open conversation, I do not take for granted, especially with all of the interference that I get. You guys are the people that I can talk to about these topics. And I hope you appreciate the fact that there are very few outlets for you as audience members to gain more information and then engage in a conversation with other people, and hopefully with me and the other hosts on TFR. And other people that are out there in the truth community that are on YouTube that have their own channels and have their own radio shows. I really encourage you to support everybody. I'm not talking necessarily financially support, because that's controversial. Yes, everybody would like to have the financial support, including us at TFR. But what's more important is that you support us by the way that you log in, you email, you engage in the chat room, you call in with questions, that you simply click on the YouTube videos and watch them. You're supporting and you're sharing your information by way of your comments, by way of just being an audience member. So I want to just thank you, and I think I echo that for everybody that's in the truth community. There's no point in us talking unless we have an audience. And unless I feel that the audience is engaged and that you appreciate what we're saying and find what we're saying to be useful, then there's no point in my expending the energy to put the research out that I do. There's no point in my, really, and I don't mean to be melodramatic, but to put myself at personal risk for what I'm doing. And I really downplay that because it's not that relevant of an issue. It's the information that's important. So, with that said, it's a big way of just saying thank you for being here today. And I encourage you to ask questions today. I would love to take as many questions as you may have. And they don't need to be relevant to the topics that I'm bringing up today. They can be on virtually any subject you care to bring up. I don't know everything, obviously. I'm not, Mr. Answer Guy, but I'll do the best I can to field the questions. But I appreciate, from a very personal standpoint, the opportunity to share with you my thoughts and my research and my DVD that's coming out next week on Thursday, and for you to listen to Douglas and I on Friday discuss that DVD. And it is a tool that you can share with other people. It's information that you can hand to someone that in a very compact fashion, it's self-explanatory, and it may help someone to realize what's going on. And therefore, that's the reason for putting the information out in a DVD. It's easier for some people to take in and understand information that they receive from a DVD rather than sitting down and reading an entire book. Not everyone has the luxury of time to sit down and pay attention to a book. And I understand that. So does Douglas. And we've had a lot of requests for the information to be placed in a DVD format for those very reasons. So, there we go. That's that topic. Alrighty, we have about 13 minutes left in this segment, so let's talk a little bit about lithium. I don't think that it's a conspiracy. I don't think that it's by accident that this was Super Bowl 51, LI, which is, as I said, the symbol in the periodic table for lithium. Now, why is lithium even germane to a show like this today? It's not the Super Bowl. The reason that it's germane is that, and many of you already have seen the reports just in the last week or so, the reports, and they're accurate, that increased levels of lithium are being sprayed in the form of aerosolized spraying, the chemtrails, around the planet. So it's important that we understand what lithium is. And it's combined, as you know, with strontium and barium, heavy metals. Most predominantly, they're mixed in with aluminum and also desiccated human red blood cells, and also nanoparticles. And the nanoparticles are what comprise the third strand of DNA that will be activated by microwave signal, by EM, electromagnetic signals. They're dormant in our system, but they compose the third strand of DNA that will be later activated. But what's going on right now with lithium is that this comprises a material that literally is dumbing down the population. It's bad enough that we have these heavy metals to begin with, and we're seeing increased rates, as Kev said to me before we went on the air, in his country, in Scotland, and I think this holds true for the entire population. We're seeing a lot more cases of advanced dementia and advanced numbers of mortality rates because of the dementia more people are dying. They literally are trying to kill us off. And in the meantime, prior to dying, we're being dumbed down by lithium, which is used to treat, in many cases, manic depression, bipolar disorders. So when a person is manic, they're up, they're happy, they're in a good mood to an extreme. And of course, when they're depressive, they're down and they're depressed and they're suicidal. What lithium does in a clinical setting is even out that bipolar syndrome and try to place people on an even keel, if you will. Well, when you even people out at a constant state, you remove their emotions and essentially render them to be a zombie. So when we see in popular culture all of these zombie movies and TV shows, I mean, this is quite literal. And the spraying of lithium on the population moves right towards that. Now, many of you may recall that on the east coast of the United States a little over a year ago, there were small rockets that were launched off the east coast. These were what are known as sounding rockets. They're used for, in the short parlance, they're used for mapping of the Earth, in particular the seabed. They were actually spraying, and this is public information that came out, spraying the eastern seaboard with lithium by way of these rockets. They were using the population of the eastern seaboard as guinea pigs. As you've heard, many governments, including the United States government, used the population as guinea pigs for a host of tests. Well, that was the precursor to what has just come out recently, that now heavy metals, including lithium, the amounts of those metals have been increased dramatically. So I don't think it's hard for you as the audience to pick up on the changes in the population. I get comments by email from a lot of people that say it looks like more and more people literally are going crazy. And that literally there are more and more people that people interact with on a daily basis who appear to be slowing down, who appear to be becoming less emotional in terms of being happy, about having a normal personality that they exhibited before. It appears that just in the last couple of months, there's been a noticeable change in the population. And I really encourage people to pay attention to this. It appears to be gradual, but it isn't. I think I've received enough information from people to say from an empirical, from an experimental standpoint, from a data standpoint, it does appear that it's just recently that there's been an increase in this mood alteration of the population. And then I hear from somebody like Kev who says that there's reports of advanced dementia and increased deaths going on in his country that matches up with what I'm seeing here in the United States. Now, this is very depressing. It's very depressing because we sit here and we think, wow, as a human being, what can I do about this? I'm not calling for pitchforks and demonstrations and rioting, okay? What I'm saying is just increase your awareness, be aware of what's going on, and take care of your families. Take care of your friends. Not everyone is going to just take this passively. Some people are going to react violently to information like this. This sense of loss of control over our lives. But we've never really had control over our lives. So I'm not trying to make this a real downer discussion or show. I mean, it sounds like it from the outset. But I think with information, with awareness, you are then able mentally to challenge what's going on. I really believe that if we know that we are being affected by chemicals, that we can make a conscious effort to work against that. I mean mentally, I mean psychologically. It's almost like forcing yourself to go to the gym and exercise. It becomes a mental exercise. If you need to get angry to do that, keep it to yourself. I'm not advocating be angry to towards other people, but if you want to use anger in the face of this information, then channel it. Make it productive. Make it a driving force. As you've heard me say so many times, think critically. Be analytical. Be strategic in the way you think. Be deliberate in the way you think. Choose your actions. Be very deliberate about how you go about your business from day to day. Because it's the subtle psychological effects that they're utilizing to change us and control us. And I've always advocated, turn off the television. That thing has the greatest influence over most people, over the greater population. When you back it up with, I consider a psychotropic drug, I know that's not exactly correct when I say that, but a psychotropic drug, drug like lithium, it's important to understand that you are being gamed. This is a psychological operation. And when you understand that there's a game afoot, then you can work against it individually in your own mind. In other words, it's being mentally strong. It's being mentally athletic. Don't let yourself just be that bowl of jello. Now, I don't necessarily mean you as the audience, because the fact that you're here and you're listening and you pay attention to programs like mine and others means that you're already a critical thinker. It already means that you're working against the psychological operation. But part of what I research and bring to you are the more subtle aspects, subtle beyond what the television and mainstream media just broadcasts in front of us, like the ritual at the Super Bowl. I mean, that ritual with Lady Gaga is for the masses. I would guarantee that no one in that football stadium, and very few of the people watching it on television or on the internet, are critical thinkers and that have any clue about chemtrail spraying and lithium and aluminum and barium and strontium and desiccated red blood cells. Those folks, unfortunately, are lost. I'm not being judgmental. I'm just stating an observation. They're lost. And when you see them standing around waving their hands and arms in the air, and they have their lights, and they're all, dancing and participating in the formations, they're participating in a satanic ritual. And they are welcoming Lucifer. They're worshiping Lucifer. Now, that's not news to you as the audience, but I'm just comparing and contrasting the fact that you are a critical thinker. You know the game is afoot. You know you're being psychologically manipulated. And you can work against that in your own mind. And do more research. Do more reading. Reading is one of the greatest mental, athletic exercises you can do. The brain is a muscle. And the more that you use it, the stronger you're going to be against what they're trying to do environmentally and psychologically through the environment to you and me and people that we care about. So when we talk about waking up the sheep, when we talk about the truth movement, quite literally, this is what it is the gaining of that information, processing that information in your mind, and doing the critical analysis, do the compare and contrast. Go out like a scientist and look at the environment, look at the people in the environment, and notice the changes. And be critical about how you behave. Do your own self-examination and recognize the manipulation that's happening to you personally. Then you can combat what they're trying to do chemically and electromagnetically to us. And this is what gets me into hot water. this is why they keep cutting me off. And speaking of cutting me off, we're about to go to break. On the other side, we've kind of done the lithium thing. Let's move on into Cassini and Saturn. And I will answer the question I got from a good friend of mine, Laura, who sent me an email today with a question about Cassini. But lithium and 5G wireless, we'll talk about that some more as well. But Kev, as we come back from the first break, if there's at least one question from the chat room, let's open up on the other side with the first question, and then we'll go on into the discussion of Saturn.
Absolutely, and Alzheimer's and other dementias are now the biggest killer in the UK. Just think about that during the break.
Real people, real radio.
Initiating the truth frequency.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
Alrighty, welcome back. I'm Anthony Patch, The Anthony Patch Show, and Kev has kept me on the air. Thank you very much, Kev Baker. And he has forwarded a question from the chat room to me. Before we do that, let's just finish off with the LI, the lithium, the Super Bowl we talked about in the first segment. And Kev was gracious enough to send to me by email, wonderful technology, an article regarding dementia and Alzheimer's as the leading cause of death in England and Wales. Aging population and better diagnosis have led to heart disease being knocked off the top spot for the first time. Alzheimer's and other dementia have replaced ischemic heart disease as the leading cause of death in England and Wales. Last year, 61,686 victims, I will call them, out of a total of 529,655 deaths registered in England and Wales, were attributable to dementia. Now that represents 11.6% of the population are dying due to dementia. To me, that is a level that would qualify this as an epidemic and even move over the threshold into being a pandemic. Now that sounds like fear-mongering, but when you talk about 11% of the population, that's huge. And if that were in the United States, I haven't done the math because I'm just looking at it, but that's millions of people. So extrapolate that to the entire planet if you were to take 11% of 7 billion. Somebody else out there with a handy calculator can figure that out for us. It says in Scripture that a third of the population will be killed. Well, I think they're going to be able to achieve that through a host of mechanisms and means. That's staggering. 11%. And that's because heavy metals like lithium are retained by brain tissue. Once they enter the brain, they don't leave. And they're readily absorbed through the skin, through osmosis, and of course they can be inhaled, ingested, all of that. They can be consumed. So this is real stuff, people. You know that. I'm not preaching at you. I'm preaching to the choir. You know this. It is out of control. Me as a Christian, I turn to God, I turn to Jesus Christ for solace and for guidance and for ultimately the way that this is resolved. But I'm not going to digress into that too far. Let's take the question that Kev gave to me during the break. It's kind of a deep question, and I appreciate it. I mean, it's remarkable. Kev, I have it noted here, but if you would take a moment, please, and read that question for the audience.
Yeah, no problem. This is one of your regular listeners, and it's Daryl from the chat room. And he's asking, how do you resolve the 1/r potential when r equals 0? Now, is this something that you ignore like mainstream physics, or do you tackle the problem in another way, such as fractal type approach, Anthony?
Yeah, I think we can take this from a mainstream physics standpoint, if one wants to adhere to the theory of the Big Bang, I personally do not adhere to the Big Bang model in the terms of an explosive expansion of the universe and either having finite or infinite boundaries to that envelope created by this explosion. That's a different discussion, the finite qualities of that. However, I differ from mainstream physics from the explosive aspect. What I look at is a replication process. Where I do agree with mainstream physics is in the point of a singularity. So when you speak of 1 over r as the potential, with that potential r being 0, you're asking me to divide 0, or use 0 as a divisor, I should say. You're asking me to divide 1, which I define as the singularity. You're asking me to define 1 by 0, which cannot be done mathematically. So you're asking me to divide something by something that does not exist. But it does point to the singularity, and that is where I agree. There's a single point of origin to the universe. And I think that, again, empirically, mainstream science, specifically physics, have enough data derived from actual scientific measuring tools to say that there was a point of origin. What I mean by replication, and Daryl, you've listened to me enough to know that I've talked about tetrahedrons, and that I focused upon Buckminster Fuller's idea, which I totally agree with, that the singularity, the point of origin, took the form of a tetrahedron, which is a triangle with a triangular base. Okay, a pyramid specifically, a pyramid with a triangular base. Therefore, that singularity began the process of reproducing itself. We see this with nanoparticles such as nanodiamonds, C60 carbon. C60 carbon at the nanoscale all the way out to the cosmological scale replicates itself through a natural self-determining process of duplication. Now, you had a point to your question as to describing it in a fractal manner. And I agree with that, and I look at the fractal as being applied to this replication of tetrahedrons from the nanoscale, which was the singularity, all the way out to the cosmological, which is the universal scale we see. And I do see, as I said at the beginning of my answer, that there is a finite edge to the universe. And that edge I describe as a sphere. And this goes back to Buckminster Fuller, because in that replication of tetrahedrons, they eventually get to the point, and we're already there, but they get to the point at the atomic and molecular scale all the way to the cosmological, they get to the point of forming a sphere. And we see this with the elements when they're cold, when they're at near absolute zero, they're a tetrahedron. But as you add energy and you add, therefore, temperature, they begin that replication process in which they manifest as more and more complex geometric or platonic solids. And we see that reproduced through the Hubble telescope observations of the star systems. You actually see the tetrahedral shapes in the form of buckyballs and Buckminster fullerenes. This is all in published data. This is not my conjecture. I'm simply pulling all these things together in a non-classical sense in terms of just, a public discussion classical. It still fits into the classical physics model of Einstein when you talk about the classical physics that are involved at the molecular and atomic scale, with the aside being Einstein wanted to use gravity as his principal force in his model. However, I use the electric model, which I have learned from the Thunderbolts project, the electric model of the universe being charged particles moving through a magnetic field and through a charged medium of ionized gas, the fourth state of matter. and ionized gas being what comprises what most people would consider or name or label the void of space. And mainstream science wants to call that dark energy and dark matter, which is purely theoretical. None of it's been proven empirically, so therefore I go to the electric model and the ionized gas as comprising that which makes up the void of space or vacuum, which of course it's not a vacuum. It's a charged medium. It's a conductive medium. So fractal, working backwards, fractal explanation in terms of almost that infinite reproduction going inward to the nanoscale or going outward on the macro scale to the cosmos. Fractal works both directions, as does this process of replication of tetrahedrons from a singularity, which is the 1 over R, which is 0. So I hope that answers your question. I appreciate that, Daryl. Kev, did we have another question, or should we move right along?
Move along, Tony. There's not any yet, but I'll certainly get any from the chat room as they come along.
Okay, sounds good. All right, Cassini. Cassini is orbiting Saturn, and it is due to enter that gaseous body in September. Now, in previous shows, I talked about September being very significant, and I relate it to Revelation 12 and the birthing of Jupiter out of Virgo, September 23rd. Suffice it to say, there are an awful lot of things happening in September. But I thought, because I received this question from someone like Daryl, who is very intelligent and has great questions, someone who contributes a lot to my discussions, and this is to Laura, so hopefully you're listening now, Laura, because I said in my email response that I would mention this on the show. Her question was, when Cassini actually is directed to impact Saturn itself from its orbits through the rings and closer between the rings and the planet itself, will it impact the southern pole of Saturn? So by way of background, just to help you put into context the nature of her question, why is she even mentioning the south pole of Saturn? Well, that is where my conjecture, and I think it's based upon good data that I reviewed, that it is part of the agenda at CERN with the Large Hadron Collider and the conjoining of the main ring with the awake linear accelerator is to create first a toroidal field using that circular configuration of the main ring, and then a torsion field. And that torsion field will then produce a twisted helix, a double strand of charged particles, oppositely charged particles, that take on a twisted strand, double helix, very much like DNA, strand of what are known as Birkeland currents that will be connected by projecting from CERN to the southern pole of Saturn. The Birkeland current enhanced electrical connection between the two planets, and then from Saturn to the other planets, because there already exists an electrical connection between all of the bodies within our solar system. And I'm focusing just on our solar system for the moment. But that was the context of the question, is the Birkeland current connection to Saturn. She was asking, do I think that the orbiter, Cassini, will be directed to impact the southern pole of Saturn? It's a fascinating question. And she thought that perhaps it would be used as a guidepost, as a marker for these Birkeland currents, a targeting position for the Birkeland currents. I've not seen anything that tells me that that's where Cassini will impact, nor have I seen anything that indicates that that is the intended target for the purpose of targeting the Birkeland currents. So I don't want to make it too long of an explanation. I'm kind of drawing it out, but I'm trying to be specific in my answer that no, there's nothing that indicates that Cassini will impact the southern pole. Now, just for the sake of discussion, I'll bring a little bit more information to the discussion here about Cassini, because we are coming up on September, and there's been this discussion in, let's call it the alternative media, about the Lucifer Project. This, I put in literally in the category of conspiracy theory. This idea that the plutonium on Cassini, once it impacts the hydrogen and the helium comprising Saturn, somehow is going to ignite Saturn. It's going to, some people say, ignite the plasma of Saturn. No. Short answer, no. It's not going to happen. It's disinformation at the worst. It's kind of silly conjecture at the best. But here's some details about Saturn. The November 30th of last year, the first of 22 orbits over the southern and northern poles of Saturn were begun, starting from the outermost ring of Saturn, which is the F ring. Now, this is kind of interesting because 22, if you follow numerology, if you follow the occult, the mystic societies, numbers are very important. So it's not by happenstance that they chose 22 orbits. Now, in some of the literature, the older literature, they talk about 20 orbits. But in the newer literature, they are very specific about saying 22 orbits. Also, on April 22nd of this year, they will initiate what is called the grand finale. And this is when the orbits will change to closer orbital pathways, with the culmination, the impact being September 15th. Now, that's just a few days before September 23rd with the birthing of Jupiter from Virgo. And it also is in the middle of a few other events that are going on in September, but I won't get into all of that at the moment. So staying on track here, we're looking at 22 orbits that are going over the northern and southern poles. If you look up Cassini, you'll find that it is a project coming out of the Jack Parsons Laboratory, known as Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, in Pasadena, California. That's the central command, if you will, for the project. That's where they're steering Cassini from. The thing that I find interesting is that Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard were totally into the occult. So there are implications to the 22 orbits. But the fact that they are orbiting not along the equatorial pathway or somewhere between the equator and the pole, but specifically going over the northern pole and the southern pole, to me it's fascinating because we all know about the hexagon at the northern pole. Now that operates or rotates in a counterclockwise direction. Well, the southern pole moves in a clockwise direction. They are opposite directions. Now, as review, my summation, my conclusion about the northern pole is that it is actually we can call it a natural, but I don't think it's natural, but it is a synchrotron particle accelerator. This is a ring-based particle accelerator. CERN's main ring of the LHC is a duplicate of the northern pole of Saturn. They've copied the mechanics of the northern pole of Saturn. Like the LHC's main ring, which has opposite pathways of particles moving at near the speed of light, they have contra-rotating particles moving in a circular fashion. So does the northern pole of Saturn. It has contra-rotating clouds of particles that have been accelerated. They're not moving at near the speed of light. That's not the issue. But they are moving in contra-rotating directions in a circular pathway that is magnetically held. Those particles at the northern pole are magnetically held to that pathway. Same thing happens at CERN. And when you move those particles in a circular pathway through a magnetic field, you generate magnetic lines of force, 90 degrees, or it's called orthogonal, 90 degrees to that pathway. So they're radiating straight out from those synchrotron pathways, both at CERN and at the northern pole. Now, the same thing is happening at the southern pole of Saturn, but they're moving as a whole in a clockwise fashion. The northern pole as a whole, even with the inner contra-rotating clouds of particles, as a whole, the hexagon is moving in a contra direction, in a counterclockwise fashion. The poles are moving opposite to one another. That's indicative of creating the twisted helical lines of oppositely charged particles comprising Birkeland currents. That means that connecting the northern and southern pole of Saturn is an electrical pathway of Birkeland currents on a massive scale. That's what will connect by way of the southern pole to the Birkeland currents generated by CERN to connect the two planets, Saturn and Earth. So I hope you're getting a clear picture of what's going on here. This is not mere conjecture. This is taking the actual physics, the actual instrumentation from Cassini and putting things together so that you have a better picture of what's going on. Now, you've heard me talk about the black cube of Saturn, the core, what's in the middle of Saturn. Now, NASA and JPL and these guys are not saying, hey, there's a cube there. But if you look at the occult side of things, they worship the black sun. That's what Saturn is. They worship the black cube. They know, the intelligence communities even admitted this during my conversation with Doug Hagman. Doug Hagman related, when he and I were on this topic of Saturn, that he had had a conversation with a friend of his within the intelligence community that he'd known for a long time, who stopped him and said, Doug, you don't know what you're talking about when you talk about the black cube of Saturn. And he said, you're right, I don't know what I'm talking about. And he said, no, you don't understand. The higher echelon in the intelligence communities all know about the black cube of Saturn. So I take that as a nice tip of the hat, a confirmation of the work that I've been doing in presenting to you that there is a black cube. Today I'm going to give you a new piece of information. I've never explained this in any other discussion, even on the Hagmans, and I'll be joining the Hagmans on the 16th next week. I'll be on for 2 hours with Doug and Joe. But the point I want to bring to you, the information that I'm going to share with you today, is that the actual construct of that black cube, yes, it's formed by Birkeland currents. It's formed electromagnetically, to put it succinctly. But the actual material comprising that black cube is metallic hydrogen. Metallic hydrogen is created under incredible pressure in the laboratory and also naturally occurring, if you want to use that parlance, those words. But the black cube of Saturn, and nobody that I'm aware of has ever presented this information. And because you are my special audience, I'm giving it to you first, that it is metallic hydrogen that comprises the black cube. Now, if we move out from the center of Saturn, I'm going to give you the layers of Saturn very quickly because we're coming up on a break. Again, because of the tremendous pressures within the inner portions of Saturn, we have hydrogen that is compressed into liquid nitrogen. It actually is transmuting, if you will. It's not an accurate term, but the transmutation of hydrogen, because of compression under tremendous pressure, it actually forms liquid nitrogen. And then further compressing towards the center, you have the metallic hydrogen. So I'm going to work out from the core, metallic hydrogen, and then liquid nitrogen, Moving out from there, we move into more of the gaseous composition of the planet to ammonium hydrosulfide. Now, water is also a major component, and you hear NASA make a big thing about discovering water on moons and other planets. Well, on Saturn, from the layer of liquid nitrogen, which is compressed hydrogen, you move out to a layer of water, and there's significant amounts of water on Saturn. Then moving out from that is the ammonium hydrosulfide. Moving further out, we have ammonia by itself in the form of clouds. And then above that, we have what they can't really identify, but they call a tropospheric haze. That's the troposphere. Okay, that's the outer atmosphere of Saturn itself. The covering of Saturn is what they describe as a haze of unknown material. So 94% of the planet is hydrogen, 6% is helium, and then the other components of methane and ammonia. And as I said, the black cube of Saturn is metallic hydrogen. It's a metal cube, quite literally.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
No hate, no hype, no fear. Real people, real radio.
Alrighty, well, welcome back. This is Anthony Patch on my own show here, but it's not my show. It can't be a show without you guys in the audience. So thank you very much for hopefully enjoying the conversation today, and I especially enjoy getting the questions. And Daryl, I hope you're still with us. I appreciate your question, and if it wasn't satisfactory, as far as my answer, happy to take questions from you or anybody else by email at Anthony Patch, author, that's Anthony Patch, AUTHOR, @gmail.com. So anytime you want to drop something to me by way of email, I'm happy to answer the questions as quick as I can. I mentioned television, and I was answering Daryl's question, and I was citing the Big Bang. And, I don't watch television, but I was over at a friend's house a few days ago, and they had some back-to-back episodes on TV of the Big Bang Theory, the TV sitcom. And I'd never watched it before. I found it, very refreshing. It was very funny. And the main character, Sheldon, I think is just fabulous. And I bring this up because I come to find out that these guys are professors at a university, and they indicated that they were in Pasadena. The school was located in Pasadena, California. I suspect, I'll put on my conspiracy theory hat, okay? Conspiracy Serious is talking right now. JPL, Pasadena, Cassini, USC, University of Southern California, Lockheed Martin, D-Wave Corporation. Lockheed, in conjunction with USC, opened they call it a public access quantum computer lab. I don't know how public it really is, but Lockheed and USC purchased a Model 128 D-Wave adiabatic quantum computer back a few years ago. I've got the information on my Urgent Discoveries tab at anthonypatch.com. If you see a breakdown of customers and dates and model numbers, it's right there. But the point is, they have an adiabatic quantum computer at USC. Perhaps this is what the Big Bang Theory is sort of making fun of, is the fact that they are actually connected to JPL, USC, and Lockheed. So I have a proposal for the audience. You guys have heard of some of those online dating services like eHarmony and whatnot. What if Sheldon, as one of their episodes, and they can freely use this idea if they want to, the writers want to use it. If Sheldon were to invent or the four characters, I guess there's four of them, the four main characters, physicists, well, 3 physicists and an engineer, I'll be specific. But if they build a quantum computer or gain access to a quantum computer, and they write some code related to an online dating service, a quantum online dating service, so that couples, potential couples, can become quantum entangled. And you guys can use your imagination. I won't go any further. But a quantum dating service, courtesy of the Big Bang Theory, UFC, Lockheed, and JPL. See, it all ties together somehow. Somehow in the world of conspiracy serious, even Cassini has something to do with television. Anyway, in my own way, I find that humorous. Let us move along. One of the comments in the chat room that we shared with new guy Kev said that you want to talk about 5G. We definitely will get into that. I'm just going to round out this discussion. Hopefully, here in the university classroom, those sitting in the back, up in the rarefied atmosphere of the upper levels of the seat, have not fallen asleep yet. But Cassini, just to round it out, like I said, we have a couple of things to take a look at in terms of the dates of Cassini. From its launch, it's actually taken 7 years for that orbiter to move from the Earth to Saturn. 7 years of travel. And it has spent 13 years in orbit. It was launched in October 15th, 1997 from Cape Canaveral. September 15th, it will impact Saturn. Well, I don't know where. Let's just say it's going to be the southern pole. Let's just say because it's orbiting 22 times between Saturn and its innermost ring, that when the grand finale, as they're calling this, takes place, it will be an impact somewhere in one of those orbital loops, as they describe it, which fly over the northern and southern poles. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say they are going to impact the southern pole of Saturn on the 22nd loop, September 15th at 5:07 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. But that's when they're going to impact. And as my friend Laura asked in her question, did she think that this was perhaps going to be used as a target, developing targeting data for the Birkeland currents? Who knows? But it's been on its mission for 19 years and 11 months now. It'll be just 1 month short of a 20-year mission. NASA plans by 2020 to launch another mission or two to Saturn, specifically to the largest moon of Saturn, Titan, and one of their other moons. And these are going to be robotic missions, they won't be manned, but robotic missions to actually place instruments and robots on these two moons, Titan and Enceladus. And the origin of Enceladus ties in with Titan, in that it's taken from Greek mythology. And it's one of the first names of the first 7 satellites of Saturn to be discovered. Now, Titans and the number 7 in terms of satellites, there's 61 satellites or moons orbiting Saturn. But the largest are totaled in the number of 7. And you've heard me talk about this cube being a prism, and this being a prism planet containing the 7 spirits of the 7 Titans. So by way of names, by way of referencing, by way of upcoming missions, they are acknowledging the Titans of Saturn, the 7 Titans. Just something to think about, just to kind of work that into the mix of what you're thinking about in terms of this planet and their agenda. But in this new mission, bringing robots to Titan, into Enceladus, they are using what is known as a solar electron propulsion system, SEP, solar electric propulsion. And part of that is a xenon thruster system. This is an ion drive. Now that sounds like things coming out of, Ray Bradbury and robots and Arthur C. Clarke in 2001, 2010, talking about ion drives. Well, those are legitimate. They're being used. The reason is that you can then have a larger payload that you can launch from Earth using a Saturn or an Atlas booster. And by way of a larger load, you can also transport it faster. Instead of taking 7 years to reach Saturn, they can reach it in a much faster fashion. I'm going to say that they can reach it in anywhere, depending on the payload and depending on the launch vehicle, anywhere from 4 to 5 years instead of 7. So in other words, their speed and the payloads can be much faster and much bigger with these systems of solar electric propulsion and the NEXT drive. NEXT is the NASA Evolutionary Xenon Thruster System, or an ion drive in short. So I hope that doesn't bore you too much, but that's if they don't connect to Saturn with the Birkeland currents, if the end of the world doesn't come in September, well, I guess they're going to take robots to the moons of Saturn. Whoop-de-doo. All righty. Just as one last point, by the way, if you didn't know it, it takes radio signals to give you a sense of the distance. It takes radio signals traveling from the Earth to Saturn, 68 to 84 minutes. Okay, so it takes over an hour just to send a signal to Saturn by radio. Now, if you equate that to the transmission of Birkeland currents, charged particles, to the southern pole of Saturn, well, those Birkeland currents will be visible. Just like the aurora borealis, there's really no difference. These are charged particles, ion, particles moving through the plasma, the charged atmosphere of Earth. Birkeland currents are visible by Hubble telescope. They've been photographed, and we've seen light years length Birkeland currents intact across the cosmos. It will take about an hour for the Birkeland current generated by the LHC and the AWAKE project to travel from Earth to the southern pole of Saturn. Therefore, we as inhabitants of the Earth will see the Birkeland currents like an aurora borealis, and it will be red in color, extending all the way across, just like the Birkeland currents that move through the cosmos. It'll be no different. So it'll be one heck of a light show. It might be in September. It might be on the 23rd of September. I don't know for sure. But September certainly is a significant time to be heads up and paying attention. And no, Cassini is not going to set fire to Saturn, even though it has 32.7 kilograms of plutonium on board, this so-called Lucifer project idea. It's important to note that this plutonium is broken up into small lead-lined cases. The purpose is to generate electricity for the instrumentation and also to keep the instruments from freezing. So it generates heat, and by doing so generates electricity. The small packets of plutonium will have absolutely no effect upon the planet itself. Will there be a visible explosion or a visible impact? I doubt it. I doubt very much that there's going to be much of anything. I mean, Cassini is so small and really doesn't have any significant mass to create a kinetic impact upon the planet that it's really not a big deal. All right, so Cassini will be moving from the F ring, which is the outer ring, and then it will move between the innermost rings and the planet as it follows these 22 polar pathways, or loops as they call them. And they started that on November 30th last year, and it will be continuing until September. So that orbiter will be doing a dance in the heavens. All right, enough with Cassini. I hope that answered the question that Laura posed to me, and perhaps a little bit more. Let's go to 5G. Let's go to Wi-Fi. Last week I talked about, I think it was last week, yeah, we talked about 5G and D-Wave computers. The connection is that D-Wave released their latest model, the 2000G model computer that they sold for $15 million to Temporal Dynamics Incorporated. Temporal, don't be misled by the name. No, they're not going to be changing time or affecting timelines. There's no space-time continuance disruption. That's not what they're about. They are all about secret, coded, encrypted communications, secure communications, and also the prevention of hacking of those communications. The reason that they purchased a D-Wave computer, and this goes all the way back to the beginning of D-Wave's computers, is that when you utilize a quantum computer, you can, using Shor's algorithm 2048 and also the next evolution of that, the 4096 algorithm, you can use those algorithms as codes for encrypting communications. If you do not have a D-Wave adiabatic quantum computer, whether it's the 128 as the number one model all the way to the 11th model, which has 131,072 qubits, which other people are not aware of, but I'm sharing with you. But even at 128, which is what UFC and Lockheed purchased, or the 512, which Google and Lockheed and the NSA all purchased their own computers with 512 qubits, and now Temporal Dynamics with the 2000Q, which is actually 2048, what I call the 2048 model. You have to have one of those computers in order to access the information that has been encrypted. That's why Temporal Dynamics purchased a D-Wave computer, so that they have secure communications that are confined to the quantum world of quantum entanglement and quantum tunneling. Now, the Chinese, as I mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, launched a satellite, geosynchronous, that is quantum entangled with a quantum computer. I do not know if China has purchased a D-Wave computer. I do not believe China has a quantum computer that is comprised of niobium qubits like D-Wave has. If they have a quantum computer, it will be comprised of transistors, gate model quantum entanglement. You can have quantum entanglement at the macro scale, at the molecular scale, and you can have it at room temperature, non-superconducting room temperature quantum entanglement. It's been done in the laboratory. I do believe that China has that capability of doing that, but I don't believe that they're using a D-Wave quantum computer. I believe they're still utilizing transistors. And yes, IBM and a couple of other companies have used transistors to achieve quantum entanglement, but it's very slow, and it does not access the number of parallel dimensions that D-Waves have been able to achieve. Now again, I'm being repetitive, but Gordy Rose in 2013, citing the 512 model, said that they are accessing 2 to the 500th power of parallel dimensions. Well, now with the 2000Q, they're accessing 2 to the 2000th power of parallel dimensions. Now, beyond the 2048, the 2000 qubit that they've released, they have not released what I call their 6th model, which is the 4096, and then the 8192, and then the 16384, 32768, 65,536, and finally, number 11, as I mentioned a moment ago, is 131,072 qubits. When you move beyond the 4096, which is the number 6 in the line of computers made by D-Wave, when you move beyond the 4096, you move into the realm of replicating the number of qubits that are in the human brain. That's the goal, and the goal was achieved of reaching the same number of qubits in the human brain utilizing niobium constructed qubits on a one-to-one basis of tubulin dimers in a human neuron, within the microtubules of the human neuron, is at the 10th model. That's 65,536 qubits, the same number of tubulin dimers within each microtubule comprising each human neuron. So the goal has always been to build a computer that matches the capabilities of the human brain in terms of a one-to-one relationship of qubits. Because each tubulin dimer is binary, has a 0 and has a 1. They're in pairs, and they're arranged opposite to one another. One is facing up, one is facing down, to make it simple. And those dimers are quantum entangled with each other, biologically quantum entangled. Same thing with qubits. In fact, in the literature, it equates the dimers to the qubits of quantum computing. I shared this document with Kev Baker. He has seen this and read this. Now, they've exceeded that 65,000, and they're at 131 and 72 with the 11th model. And essentially, that's where they're going to stop, is at the 11th model. Think about the 22 orbits of Cassini. Think about the number 11. There are always mathematical connections with everything that's going on. So, 5G is 2048, is the 2000Q model that they just sold to Temporal Dynamics. 5G and the D-Wave computer that was just sold match one-to-one. 5G in Wi-Fi is called QAM. 5G is 2048 QAM. That's quaternary amplitude modulation is what QAM stands for. Now, in theory, you could move to 6G, 7G, 8G, 9G, 10G, and 11G. The advancement of the number of qubits not only are intended to match the qubits, the dimers in the human brain, but to create a Wi-Fi broadcast system, a line of communication that also advances lockstep with the number of qubits. As 5G advances, it advances parallel in identical numbers to the D-Wave computer qubits. That is not by accident. So again, borrowing from D-Wave, Gordy Rose, and his statement about accessing parallel dimensions, thousands of them, that access, as I said, is done through quantum entanglement and quantum tunneling. The broadcast signal between those parallel dimensions and our reality is quite literally a Wi-Fi signal. This is not a man-made construct. This is information that is in the realm of forbidden knowledge, knowledge we are not supposed to have access to. It is a system of interdimensional communication with fallen angels that are providing two-way communication by this device that was given to them. That knowledge was given to them about how to set up this communication tool between dimensions. Gordy Rose's own statement, again, you can see the quotations at anthonypatch.com at the Urgent Discoveries tab. I break this video down. He states that that if they're clever enough to access these dimensions, they are able to extract resources. They can reach in and grab, as he says, and extract resources from these parallel dimensions. He does not define the resources, but I'll define it for you. One is energy. They're bringing energy. 10% more energy is returned to our reality than D-Wave is inputting into these parallel dimensions. Second to the energy is those resources comprise information, data. Binary information is being transmitted, digital information at the quantum level is being transmitted into our reality. Now, I won't go into it at length, but I'm just going to touch point that this is what is causing the Mandela effect. This is the tip of the iceberg of those resources coming through and altering our reality. Mandela effect is a test. It's a psychological operation. It is a pebble in the pond of the consciousness within the sentient world simulation that is run by the quantum computers. All of these computers, including the 2000Q, the 5G level computer that was sold to Temporal Dynamics, all of those systems are quantum entangled with each other. Every quantum computer built by D-Wave is networked. So by way of that, you have to add all of the qubits of all of the computers together as one system. Otherwise, they conflict with one another. So they quite literally have more than just individual models out there doing their own individual thing, like at UFC with Lockheed, and maybe with the guys at the Big Bang Theory TV show. Who knows? But I do know that they're networked, because in that quantum world, you have to be able to communicate and cooperate. Otherwise, you create conflict. And you can see that in the artificial intelligence contained within your own smartphones. And the smartphones are the smart grid, which is the sentient world simulation, which is the 5G run system. That is the system that runs SWF, at least in the world of public disclosure.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
The wicked ones, obviously under heavy Masonic influence.
Welcome back, Anthony Patch, on the last segment of the Anthony Patch Show. Time really does fly. It just amazes me how quickly 2 hours can go if you're running off at the mouth like I am. But I enjoy this. I enjoy having this opportunity to share with you some of the things that I run across. So thank you for joining me today, and those of you that are listening in the archives, thank you for tuning in later on. 5G is interesting because this is the communication tool between parallel dimensions, and it's the communication tool within the sentient world simulation. And I should define that for people who maybe not heard me talk about it, but the SWS is the matrix. It is a simulation that is self-aware through the quantum computers that at the 512 level, Gordy Rose said had the equivalent processing power of 7 billion human brains. Well, the 512 model was the third model they released. We're now up to 2048 and the fifth model. So, we're well beyond 7 billion human brains of processing. I have a chart that I've put together, and it's coming out in my new book, Coalescence, where I tie in about 12, maybe more references to each model number of the computer. I won't go into that right now, but suffice it to say, CERN's a big deal. The particle colliders are a big deal. Brooklyn currents going to Saturn, yeah, that's a big deal. Opening a portal, opening a gateway, what I call the freeway on a macro scale, a portal on a macro scale. Controlled, so it doesn't expand to a vacuum bubble, controlled by these adiabatic quantum computers. But CERN's nothing more than a drill. It's nothing different than your cordless drill. It's just a tool. The real game, and I don't say this very often, but I'll share it with this audience. The real game in town, the real game that's afoot, is not just the sentient world simulation and the psyops and the games that they're playing with us psychologically with lithium. The real game is D-Wave. And in, let's say, the greater truth community, let's talk YouTube community, if you will, there's been an awful lot of attention paid to CERN, including through me. But you know what? That's like the magician's hands. What he's doing with the left hand is not the real magic. It's in the right hand or vice versa. What they have successfully done is divert the truth community's attention to CERN. Yeah, it's the biggest machine. It's the most expensive, most elaborate, most powerful in recorded human history. Yeah, it's the Tower of Babel, and it's situated over the doorway to the abyss. But the key to the abyss, who cares that there's a door? You got to have the key to unlock the door. Otherwise, the door is just a door. The key is D-Wave. It's the network quantum computers. It's all the computers merged together. It's the breaking of Shor's algorithm, the encryption, the key to that encryption. It's the key that it takes to break the encryption. And once you break the code, now you have the information. Now you have the hidden knowledge. In Revelation 9, it talks about the angel being cast to earth, which is Lucifer, with the key to the bottomless pit, that I've not found anyone else has been able to identify the key itself. Now, about a year ago, I came out with some information saying that the model number, the sixth one, if you want to call it 6G, the 4096 qubits, was the key. And at that time, a year ago, I thought it was the code, because 4096 is a key for encrypting in the world of 6G, in the world of cryptology, beyond RSA coding. 4096 is the key to break all codes, as is its predecessor, 2048. Both of those can break any encrypted RSA system code in the world. That's why NSA came knocking on the door very early on and purchased the third model, the 512, from D-Wave, because they understood, and they'd known about it. This is just public information I'm sharing. But in the timeline that's public, they came and said, hey, we need this 512 because we want to break encrypted codes. Well, D-Wave has its origins with DARPA. Their initial funding was $10 million, and then they went to venture capital, and they evolved with their next team of scientists with $20 million. And that's where Eric and Gordy got together and built the actual system that we see today of D-Wave's computers. But this is where the understanding that D-Wave is where you should focus your attention. Yeah, CERN's doing their thing, and yeah, they're going to open a portal and all those good, wonderful things I've talked about. For over 3 years, almost 4 years now, I've been rattling off at the mouth about CERN. But the big game in town, the real stuff to look at in the other hand of the magician, is D-Wave. That's why they sent a couple of guys to very politely talk to me when I did a Ground Zero University event with Clyde Lewis, and they met me in the parking lot, and they were very nice to me. And they said, we like what you're saying, but we want you to stop. And I went dark for 4 months, and then I came back. I'm here by the grace of God. I'm just doing what I've been told by Jesus Christ. Okay? It's as simple as that. That's what it comes down to. And he has physically, and I think psychologically, protected me. If you want the real full armor of God, you need the Holy Spirit. You need Jesus Christ in your life. I'm not going to preach about all that today, but you know where I'm coming from. But we are immersed now in a 5G system. Iridium Corporation launched, courtesy of the X-Rocket system, about 3 weeks ago now, 10 satellites, geosynchronous orbital satellites, to broadcast 5G to every spot on the planet. And they are arranged in that geosynchronous orbit in what is known as a constellation. Now, they use those names, constellation, freely in the world of communications and in satellites and in telecommunications, even on terrestrial level. They talk about constellations. When you talk about QAM, 5G QAM, 2048 QAM, 4096 QAM. When you do a spectral analysis of that waveform, the amplitude modulation, it is graphically represented in what they call a constellation. They are the points that comprise the data within that graphical representation called a constellation. They replicate the same thing in orbit in the placement of satellites into a constellation pattern. The reason for that is so that no spot on the planet is immune. And I use that word specifically. No place is immune from the full immersion in 5G. Now here in the neighborhood where I'm at, the best that we have had has been 4G, a 4G signal. About 3 weeks ago, intermittently, when I log into my internet, I will see the other 3G, 4G signals in the neighborhood. But intermittently, for about an hour or so, throughout the day, 5G will pop up, and then it'll disappear. I find that very interesting. It's obvious that what they're doing is utilizing 5G to surround me on a focused level. It doesn't mean that I'm a targeted individual or that, they're manipulating me. I'm not going down that rabbit hole. But I give that to you as an example of the sentient world simulation already represents every person on the planet as a node and is given an avatar to identify that node, and therefore monitors every person. This is not paranoia. This comes right out of Princeton University's white paper published in 2006 with the implementation of SWS in 2007. That real-time monitoring of every node will be accomplished through this SWS. That's the environment that we're immersed in right now, is the 5G. And as D-Wave continues to implement further and further up the scale from 5G, which is the number 5 computer, as I call it, to the 11G, the 11th model computer, and that's 131,072 qubits, that's only going to further immerse us in these broadcast signals. And I'm going to let you extrapolate what that means on a psychological level, because next week I'll touch that perhaps a little more in depth, the psychological aspects of Wi-Fi. But where it goes to, and you can research this between now and next Friday, are the tubulin dimers, D-I-M-E-R-S, and microtubules, and then the human neuron. And look at the construct of the microtubules. They are Buckminster fullerenes. They are C60 carbon. They are tetrahedrons forming tubes. And now you can see why I talk about the tetrahedron and my model of the universe being a 600-cell tetrahedron. Because even at the microscopic level, at our microtubules in our neurons, we have tetrahedrons. So let me step back just a little bit to the number 10 model, the 65,536 qubit computer, which equals the same number of tubulin dimers within the microtubules. At that point, D-Wave has achieved, and I say has in real time, and it's not public information, but has created what I call wet and warm qubits. I'm not trying to be rude here. We're talking about biological wet and warm qubits. Room temperature quantum entanglement accomplished biologically using calcium, phosphorus, and oxygen to build those artificially intelligent qubits. So they are mimicking tubulin dimers with qubits, microtubules utilizing C60 carbon in the form of microtubules arranged as Buckminster fullerenes to contain these qubits comprised of calcium, phosphorus, and oxygen. No longer do they need a black cube that has an environment that's colder than outer space and is shielded from all electromagnetic interference, which otherwise would break down the coherence, the signal, the quantum entanglement of the qubits. They don't need to go to that extreme. Literally, our brains operate through quantum entanglement. Again, this comes right out of the papers, right out of the mainstream science. This comes right out of the same paper that I shared with Kev Baker. A seminal paper that ties together the quantum computers, particle accelerators, specifically CERN, and biological artificial intelligence that is systems that are self-aware. This is why they call it the sentient world simulation. It is self-aware. The matrix is self-aware. And we are living in a matrix that is self-aware. So they have achieved a computer that is on par with the human brain in terms of numbers and construct. And it is a biological quantum computer. And I think you all know where that leads to in terms of its application. And I can share more of that next week when we have a longer opportunity to discuss it. But extrapolate beyond that. Go to number 11. And 11, again, in numerology in the world of occult, is very significant, and we can relate that to 9/11 if you want. But the 11th model, 11G Wi-Fi, is 131,072 qubits, or tubulin dimers, if you will. A super brain, a brain that is beyond ours in just looking at the corresponding numbers. And that exists. That exists today. The 11th model. You are never going to hear D-Wave talk about it. But it's a simple fact of combining the research into qubits, how to build them, how to arrange them, and how to build a quantum computer biologically. Because the 11th model, just like the tech that I talked about, is also a sentient, biological, warm and wet qubit quantum computer. And it maintains its coherence, its quantum entanglement, therefore its ability to process data at the quantum scale through quantum tunneling. It is able to do that without the shielding that I talked about with the black cube. When you see pictures on the internet, you see people on YouTube talking about D-Wave computers, and they always show the black cube, which replicates the black cube of Saturn symbolically, and the black cube at Mecca, and replicates the worship of Saturn as the black sun. These are all tied together. This is all about Saturn. This is all about resurrecting the dead spirits. So why go to the extent of having 11G Wi-Fi and biologically sentient, artificially intelligent computers? That's for the purpose of opening the portal to allow the dead, I'm being very succinct here, to allow the dead to be resurrected. I elaborate this in my new book, Coalescent. But to get the foundation, you need to look at revising reality. But in my latest book, I present the details as to how the dead are resurrected. This is a Frankenstein scenario. That's why that book by Shelley was written. She got the same inspiration and information for the writing of Frankenstein as do the guys at CERN and D-Wave, because it all goes back to the pharaohs. It all goes back to mummification for resurrection in the future. It goes from Egypt to Babylon to Sumerian writings. Everything has always been about defeating death, achieving immortality. The elaborate mummification of dead bodies, be it pharaohs, kings, or whatever, has always been for the purpose of placing them in suspended animation for resurrection at a future time when the technology existed to merge the biological, the DNA, with the spirits. Why are they opening the portal to the other side, to the realm of the dead? It's to allow the spirits to match up here in this reality, to match up with the DNA of the dead. The resurrection of the DNA is accomplished through the sequencing of DNA that's been done, representing the DNA codes, the sequential codes, as ones and zeros, and utilizing the quantum computers, the reproduction of that sequence, if you want, euphemistically calling them biological printers, to create the biological body that once existed in the ancient times and literally resurrect them either as giants or as normal stature individuals. But let's just call it resurrecting the Nephilim, just to make it easy. And when you resurrect that DNA in a body physical form, you then can take the spirits, the spiritual entities that come through the portal, through what I call the freeway. The digitized DNA is one way of putting it, but literally the spiritual aspects, the dead spirits brought through, that they communicate with, that people have communicated with for thousands of years. When they talk about communicating with the dead, they're talking about talking to spirits. So the spirits come through the portal, match up with the newly constructed, through DNA sequencing, the digitized DNA, the reconstructed bodies of the old, of the Nephilim and others, and they are matched up in this reality. Now, this sounds completely far-fetched. I totally understand that. And there are a few people out there that are detractors of my conclusions, and that's normal. But it requires doing a lot of research. What I'm doing is distilling down the research and giving it to you. That's why I write books. That's why I produced a DVD, is to give you the information so you don't have to spend the time researching things like I do. Yes, I know you have to take my opinions and conclusions at face value or for whatever they're worth, or discount them completely. That's fine. But at least I'm presenting it to you for your consideration. But focus on D-Wave. D-Wave is really the key to the bottomless pit. It is the networking of all of these quantum computers together into one system that breaks the code that's encrypted, the forbidden knowledge. And when you break that key for encrypting information, you can decipher that information. You can break the code, you can read the information, and that gives you the information you need to open a portal to the abyss. That's the key to the bottomless pit, is D-Wave. Now, we're about to go. We only have about 3 minutes left in the show. Real quickly, again, Douglas Woodward, my co-author from Revising Reality, is going to join me for 2 hours next week. We're going to talk about Revising Reality in the DVD, but we're also going to get into more discussions on the ramifications of these computers and D-Wave itself. I'm going to end on a rather controversial note. I oftentimes get comments to videos or emails sent to me about my position on the flat earth. It's pure nonsense. It is a psychological operation. It is meant to divide people. It is meant to cause Group A and Group B, however you want to define them, Christian and atheist, secular and religious, whatever groups you want to talk about, but it's to pit Group A and Group B against each other. It is to cause dissension and arguments. So when someone comes to you, this is my own personal thing, you decide on your own, but if somebody is so insistent that you must believe in the flat earth, otherwise you're a heretic in the world of Christian belief and theology, they call you a heretic. Flat earth is meant to cause arguments and fights and divisions. Don't fall for it. Don't allow them to engage you in an argument. Do what I'm doing when I receive those, and I just flat out ignore them. I flat out ignore the flat earth proponents. They are so argumentative. I only bring it up because it's been brought to my attention so many times that I've needed to state my position clearly and succinctly that I am not a flat earther. And that's all the airtime I'm going to give that subject. And that's the only acknowledgement to that dissenting group of disinformation people. These are trolls. This is a disinformation campaign. So, do what you want with that information, but my choice is to ignore them. I've ignored them up to this point, but as I said, I've had enough questions about it. I thought I should address it today. Thank you for a great show. I wish that there had been more questions, but that's your choice. That's okay. I appreciate the 30-plus people that have been in the chat room today and everyone else that's been listening and will be listening. Kevin Baker, I want to thank again for covering my back and making it possible for me to make this phone call and share with you. And next week we'll get back together and talk a little bit more about 5G and other cool things like that if you think it's cool. In the meantime, if you want to send me questions or ask me by email what you would like me to talk about in my shows, I'm wide open to it. Thank you all, and God bless, and good night.
Real people, real radio. Wherever you are, make it TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.
All righty, well, welcome. This is Anthony Patch, and this is the Anthony Patch Show. Thank you for listening today. I appreciate everybody who is joining us in the chat room today. I'd acknowledge you, but I can't see my chat room. About 15 minutes ago, my backup, or I should say my primary, my old laptop, was remotely hacked and taken down. They shut my power down, and I am on my newer laptop as we speak. Hopefully that'll hold together, but I do not have Skype, so I'm on the phone today. Thanks to Kev Baker, who's here with us today, as always, covering my back, working out all the bugs so that I can share with you today. So welcome, and hopefully things will hold together and they won't cut me off. I'm running solo today, with the exception, of course, of having Kev here with me to jump in and help out. We would like to take some questions later on in the show from the chat room, and perhaps if we can work it out, I'll let Kev, wave his magic wand, so to speak, and see if we can take some calls as well. But we'll do the first segment just kind of covering some of the highlights, and then we'll see how the chat room fills with questions and go from there. A lot's been going on. We had the Super Bowl, of course, with Lady Gaga, and lots of YouTube videos going through and interpreting all of the satanic elements of her ritual. I'm not going to cover those today. Lots of that has been done by people like my good friend Gon Shimura from Face Like the Sun, and some very good analysis out there. I think people are really understanding the language and the symbols of the rituals very accurately now, and it's really amazing how many people on YouTube, and a lot of people want to put YouTube down and put down people and their channels and whatnot. And yeah, there's a lot of nonsense out there, but I really have to commend the people that have, in the last couple of years, learned the language from the spiritual, from the occulted side of things, and have been able to interpret accurately what's going on in our environment, in our world, and how we're being affected by the spiritual world. And you've heard me in the last couple of shows talk about psychological operations and psyops in general. There's no point in my, really, and I don't mean to be melodramatic, but to put myself at personal risk for what I'm doing. And I really downplay that because it's not that relevant of an issue. It's the information that's important. So, with that said, it's a big way of just saying thank you for being here today. And I encourage you to ask questions today. I would love to take as many questions as you may have. And they don't need to be relevant to the topics that I'm bringing up today. They can be on virtually any subject you care to bring up. I don't know everything, obviously. I'm not, Mr. Answer Guy, but I'll do the best I can to field the questions. But I appreciate, from a very personal standpoint, the opportunity to share with you my thoughts and my research and my DVD that's coming out next week on Thursday, and for you to listen to Douglas and I on Friday discuss that DVD. And it is a tool that you can share with other people. It's information that you can hand to someone that in a very compact fashion, it's self-explanatory, and it may help someone to realize what's going on. And therefore, that's the reason for putting the information out in a DVD. It's easier for some people to take in and understand information that they receive from a DVD rather than sitting down and reading an entire book. Not everyone has the luxury of time to sit down and pay attention to a book. And I understand that. So does Douglas. And we've had a lot of requests for the information to be placed in a DVD format for those very reasons. So, there we go. That's that topic. Alrighty, we have about 13 minutes left in this segment, so let's talk a little bit about lithium. I don't think that it's a conspiracy. I don't think that it's by accident that this was Super Bowl 51, LI, which is, as I said, the symbol in the periodic table for lithium. Now, why is lithium even germane to a show like this today? It's not the Super Bowl. The reason that it's germane is that, and many of you already have seen, which just in about the last 10 days, the news has been, pardon the purposeful pun, but the news has been leaking out of Fukushima that reactor 2, the core, is doing the good old China syndrome. They cannot locate the core. It's melted down through the floor of the reactor vessel. Therefore, we have another more massive, this time, plume of radiation that is emanating from Japan and spreading towards the continental United States. Many of you as listeners to the show already know this information. But I bring it up just because it is part of that entire manipulation of our environment, the terraforming of the planet, as you've heard me cite before. But really, it's the conjunction of all these things that are coming together that are reshaping our reality. So Douglas and I will be discussing Revising Reality, the DVD, and the contents of it over the course of about 2 hours next week. Next week's show, next Friday, Douglas will be my special guest. And in essence, we'll recreate much of the conversation that we recorded for this DVD. So that's sort of my gift to you as listeners, as participants here on this show, that you get a chance for free to hear more in-depth discussion about this. Now, we'll try to put up the PowerPoint if I can get Skype working again. It's so dodgy to get Skype happening here at my end, and it has nothing to do with my Wi-Fi signal. The timing is always right before I come on the show or right when I'm about to go on the air that Skype gets cut, and that's why I'm on my cell phone again today. The rest of the week it runs fine. And when I'm on other shows like Tradcat Night I was on just recently with Eric, I generally don't get interfered with too much, but they sure target me when I'm here on TFR. And I think that's because TFR is high on their radar with all of the other great shows that we have on this network that really bring the cutting-edge research to you. And I want to thank you for the opportunity just to talk to you, just to have the ability to talk to a friendly audience. So I'm going to get a little personal with you. I know it's trite to say that you're my family, but think of it in this context. In your daily walk of life with your family, with your coworkers, with your neighbors, and just people in general that you run into, how often do you get an opportunity to touch on the topics that we talk about on Truth Frequency? How often do you get an opportunity to talk about or even listen and learn perhaps some new information from someone like myself and the specific topics that I get into? This is really a rare opportunity, and I say that it's also rare in the sense that it's an endangered species. Our ability to have this open conversation, I do not take for granted, especially with all of the interference that I get. You guys are the people that I can talk to about these topics. And I hope you appreciate the fact that there are very few outlets for you as audience members to gain more information and then engage in a conversation with other people, and hopefully with me and the other hosts on TFR. And other people that are out there in the truth community that are on YouTube that have their own channels and have their own radio shows. I really encourage you to support everybody. I'm not talking necessarily financially support, because that's controversial. Yes, everybody would like to have the financial support, including us at TFR. But what's more important is that you support us by the way that you log in, you email, you engage in the chat room, you call in with questions, that you simply click on the YouTube videos and watch them. You're supporting and you're sharing your information by way of your comments, by way of just being an audience member. So I want to just thank you, and I think I echo that for everybody that's in the truth community. There's no point in us talking unless we have an audience. And unless I feel that the audience is engaged and that you appreciate what we're saying and find what we're saying to be useful, then there's no point in my expending the energy to put the research out that I do. And I'll touch on that a little bit. I'll review a little bit of that with 5G and the 2048 model number from D-Wave Corporation, which was just released late last month, the 2000Q, and that is actually a 2048 chip. But we'll get into that later. So here are the topics we're going to go through today. We're going to talk about the Super Bowl in terms of Super Bowl 51 in Roman numerals, that is LI. That is also the element name for lithium. So we're going to talk a little bit about lithium and chemtrails. We're going to go back to my stomping grounds, so to speak, of Saturn and talk about the Cassini orbital satellite and what the latest news on that is and what's coming up in September with Cassini. Had a great question from a audience member, Laura. Sends me a lot of videos. She's a researcher in her own way, in her own right, and sends me some great information. But she had a question about Saturn and Cassini, and so we'll get to that. The other point is, pardon me, hopefully my voice isn't getting hacked here. The other thing we'll try to get through today is I have an announcement regarding a DVD that was produced by myself and Douglas Woodward, one of my other co-authors in Revising Reality, my nonfiction book that's been out for, about 3 months now, and is still available on my website. What we did was we joined with Lynn Oz from her great channel on YouTube. And she was our host for a conversation that ran about 2 hours. And what we did was we took slides from a PowerPoint presentation that Douglas put together that has the key points from our book. And the reason that I even bring the book up is that it's a great foundational tool to a lot of the things that people are talking about in the truth community that have to do with how our reality is being shaped and how it's being changed, whether chemically through lithium, chemtrails, through 5G, Wi-Fi technology from the D-Wave Corporation, which is associated with CERN, of course, to Fukushima and reactor number 2,